the City of Miami Police Department. And one thing I've learned as a lawyer who's litigated at every level of the court system in our country, including the Supreme Court of the United States, every day you walk into a courtroom, it's a 50-50 on your best day. So I always take that. No case is assured. You can think strongly about your legal position, which I do, but there's no guarantees because it's not a science. It's human beings arguing to another human being who then makes a human decision, which obviously is prone to either being correct or being flawed, as we are as humans. So, that aside, I think some history that led us to where we are, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I think it's important on the economic question that you raised. When I started working for this fund, we had $20 million, $100 million, something like that, not a lot. And now there's approaching $2 billion in this fund. But during the 1990s, the stock market was particularly on an upward slope. And the city's contribution is based on a result. And what the city's contribution is based on is you put in a fixed amount of your pay, you get a certain amount of money from the state of Florida, which is a revenue sharing off of a tax on auto insurance, is primary, and for firefighters on fire insurance. And probably 2/3 of the money that will pay the benefits for the members of our fund will come from the capital markets, the stock market, the bond market, real estate, whatever it is that we're invested in. And that's not my number, that's actually what history has shown with this fund and with the U.S. Bureau of the Census, which keeps very detailed records on all 7,000 public pension funds in the United States, came to the conclusion too. And in the 1990s, because of superior performance in the capital markets, the city's contribution is then the leftover part. This is a defined benefit plan, which means you get a fixed percentage of your pay multiplied by the number of years that you worked here, and it's guaranteed for your life. And 75% of your benefit also goes to a survivor, if you have a surviving spouse or child. And actuaries, who are simply mathematicians, it's the same kind of work that's done to make odds on sporting events and in casinos. They figure out what the likelihood is of what pay is going to be looking forward at the end of your career. What's the likelihood that someone will pass away during their service or become disabled and start drawing earlier? What's the possibility they'll just quit and never get a benefit from the fund and just take their own contributions out of it? They factor all of the hundreds of, we have almost 5,000 participants in this plan, and they come up with a number that's changed into a percentage of payroll or a flat dollar amount, however you want to look at it, that says this much money has to go into the fund every year. So if it's $1 million that has to go in a year, and the premium tax and the earnings in the markets and your contributions equaled or exceeded $1 million, the city doesn't put in any money. And in the 1990s, the plan actually had more the value of the assets was greater than the accrued liabilities at the time. Salaries were a lot lower than they are now, even with the pay cut. And the benefit structure was not where it is now. And so two things happened in the 1990s. We had an overfunding situation. And in the pension business, an overfunding truly only exists if the plan's closed and everybody's dead. And then you know you have more money. And you paid everybody out and you got money left over, then you know you're overfunded. Otherwise, it's akin to someone who is at a card table and has chips in front of him and says, I'm ahead. If you cash in your chips and you leave, you left ahead. If you stay in the game, there's always a risk that your pile of chips will be diminished. And what happened in the 90s is two things. The city's contribution fell to zero. Or, even greater, what the city did is when it did owe money, it used some of the excess earnings in the plan to make its contribution. They said, well, we'll live off of the fat of the land. As a compromise to the members, though, for doing that, it increased the benefit level, which is where some of the benefits that are currently enjoyed by our members came from. So we spent more and put in less. And when the markets became unstable beginning in the early 2000s, really two events happened. Now, many people think that September 11th was what drastically affected the stock market. Actually, it only affected it for about 3 months. We had a much bigger market crash in 1987. But a lot of the companies that everyone was invested in, all institutional investors, were the dot-com companies in the early 2000s. And many of those companies started to collapse in the early 2000s, and so the markets declined. In 2008, when the Great Recession, which lasted a couple of years, began, instead of making the usual 8.5%, 9%, 10% that we've been making, we had a negative. So did every other pension fund in this country. There was only one of the 7,000 pension funds in the U.S. had a positive rate of return in 2008, and theirs was 0.5%, and that's because they were entirely in bonds. Of course, they didn't make much in the good years either, but and as the economic engine, though, of the markets has returned, the situation has improved. Another thing also happened in 2008, which was a tremendous effect on the plan sponsor, the city. Cities in Florida are heavily dependent on two things: ad valorem real estate taxes and sales taxes. We don't have an income tax in Florida, as you know, fortunately. And cities are restricted in what they can levy as taxes by state law. Cities can only levy taxes on those things that their state legislature says you can levy. And in 2008 and 9, the value of real estate dropped precipitously everywhere. I'm sure you all know, from the value of your own homes. And so the city's tax revenue dropped precipitously. At the same time, because the fund wasn't earning what it had been accustomed to earning, and this plan has earned well above its assumed earnings rate since inception. But you had this snapshot picture beginning in 2008, where we didn't earn the 8 or 9 that we're used to earning. We had -20. And that means you had -28, because you didn't earn what you were planning on, plus you went down. And at the same time, the city contribution would go up, because they're the variable in this. The city contribution, which had been at the zero level in the 90s, is now skyrocketing at a time when they're least able to pay for it, because sales taxes are down and real estate taxes are down. How the city chooses to tax itself, their business over on that street corner. We don't have any control over that. The board has a responsibility to take the number that the actuary gives it and report that number each year. What led to these discussions is the fact that the financial stress on the plan sponsor and the incumbent stress on the plan led the parties to come together to discuss things. Of the 50 states, all 50 have changed benefits for future workers, generally on the downside. Now, interestingly enough, as the markets have improved, some states that lowered them 4 or 5 years ago are now actually increasing them. And we're seeing a movement of police officers and firefighters across state lines looking for better employment. And so your comments that you made and that the president made, I think, are appropriate. That's what led us to where we are. From a legal ownership standpoint, all of the members who were hired prior to, well, as of today, are protected as beneficiaries of the agreement and the terms of the city code. There's also provision in the city charter, chapter 16, which was created at the time of consolidation, which protects the level of your benefits. New hires who aren't here yet don't have that protection, and the employer is generally free to set the terms that it chooses for new hires. But by the same time, as someone noted here today, that if the benefits offered are not competitive, they will simply not come to work in Jacksonville. Or worse, they'll come here, get training at the great expense of the taxpayers, and take that training and go into Clay County or Nassau County or Georgia or somewhere else. So, and I do understand all that. And by the way, for those of you who don't know, I'm a Jacksonville native. Grew up here, went to school here, families lived here since, about 112 years. So, long-time residents. And so all of that led to where we are now. And it is easier, quite frankly, to make changes in benefit structures for people who aren't yet on the job, because they have a choice that you guys don't have, which is, this is what I'm offered, do I want the job or not, as opposed to, this is what I was offered, and now it's going to change. And changes, one of the things the chairman pointed out in a meeting several months ago is that the pay cut that you took, Mr. President, I think 2 contracts ago,
Yes, sir.
was 3% pay cut, actually is impeding your pension more than what you contribute to the plan. While it's significant that you make a significant portion of your pay goes into the system. State retirement system pays 3%. And in fact, the city council members and the mayor are in the state retirement system. And they only pay 3, you pay 8. And the changes in contribution are the one thing that probably isn't constitutionally protected. The other parts that are the benefit structure. The reason why, for example, there's a discussion about increasing employee contributions is one, everybody talks about shared sacrifice, and I know that you all have made one, 3% a year for several years already. Has put you substantially behind the economic 8-ball, because when you lower your pay, you lower your future retirement benefit. What you put in is you get back. That's the other change had to do with the drop, which what's in the proposed discussion issues was a different way of calculating interest on your drop account. Now, a lot of people think drop accounts double dipping. It's really your own benefit. What you're doing is working, not accruing any more benefits, capping your benefit instead of going home, sitting on the front porch, or going to work somewhere else while a new person comes in and then they got to start a new benefit for that person. There has been criticism of the current rate of pay. Actually, it's lower than the rate of return of the plan because you pay contributions while you're in the drop. The substitute drop has a range that's lower than the current guarantee, but a possibility of higher than the current guarantee, but no contribution anymore. So it's probably a wash. It's just a different way of calculating money. The primary change really will be an increase in the contribution. And the increase in the contribution, however, is tied to a pay raise from the city. Because the idea is they give you the money, you give back the cash, but you get the value of raising your base for retirement. And that's a fair trade on an economic basis. There is savings in the plan. The savings, and I don't want to speak for the actuary, and I know Mr. Keenan is more conversant in that, but saving money for the plan sponsor is not a sin either. You want to ensure that whatever sins were committed 20 years ago by underfunding the plan are cured within your lifetime, so that there will be enough money to pay you and your survivors. Right now the plan is cash positive, which means more money comes in than goes out, which means the plan is not in any imminent danger. But being less well funded than some others, you want to see the plan rise to a higher level of funding. And part of this agreement was to ensure an additional contribution from the plan sponsor with some penalties attached to it for not making those payments. So everybody has to pay. A long time ago, Florida rejected the concept of pensions as a gratuity. My personal view is everybody ought to have a good pension. That's what workers ought to have, every worker. But what attracts you to the dangerous work that you do, and for which you have my dying gratitude, is this benefit. And the board, though, has to make difficult business decisions as part of this process to ensure that the essence of the deal that you made is observed. And I think, Chief, that's probably the best summary I can do.
Well, I think that